Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to the August 10th Public Works Committee meeting. Due to the Safer at Home order, all committee members are participating virtually. For virtual meetings, committee members will be muted until asked to be heard. When there is a vote, a roll call will be conducted. A committee member will be recognized, raise their hand, and state their vote. Committee members are Councilmember Barbara Haynes Burke, Vice Chair, Councilmember John Larson, Councilmember Annette Scipio, and myself, Councilmember McIntosh. As is our custom, we have both consent items and general agenda items. Tonight we have 6 items on the consent agenda, which we will pull if anyone has comments or questions about them. If not, we'll approve them in one motion, and then we'll get to our 3 general agenda items. Are there any consent agenda items that council members or committee members and council members like to discuss further? Councilmember Scipio.
C3.
Okay, if there's nothing else, I would ask for a motion to approve the balance.
So moved.
Do I have a second? Thank you very much. City Clerk, if you'd call the roll.
Councilmember Scipio.
Yes.
Councilmember Larson.
Yes.
Councilmember Burke.
Yes.
Member McIntosh.
Aye. Okay, and City Clerk, if you would read item C3.
Item C3, resolution fixing date for public hearing on a petition to close an abandoned federal court and notice to all persons interested in the closing thereof.
All right, on my handy little cheat sheet here, I've got Damon Duquesne as my go-to for this item.
Yes, sir. Good evening, Chairman, members of the committee, and members of the council. Councilmember Scipio, how may I help you this evening?
Actually, I just wanted to make one little statement about this item, and it is in response to all of the violence we've had in Rolling Hills. The owners is petitioning to close the street to have a gated community. They will close the public street and erect a gate for access to the development. And I just wanted you to know, as well as the public, that sometimes this is how we address problems in neighborhoods, is that we make them gated communities, which could be a very positive, but it will allow people from just randomly driving into that development and bringing negative behavior with them. So that was the what I just needed to make that statement about that. If anyone else had any other comments, otherwise I'll just move for approval.
Councilmember Burke has a question or comment.
Yes, thank you so much, Chair McIntosh. I just wanted to say that I think that this is great, a great move on the part of the owners to close this street off and make sure that you have to access it through going in and out by car through the gate. But I'm also wondering about individuals who might enter on foot. And we know that they can come from other directions. What kinds of efforts are being put in place to block those individuals off if they decide to enter by foot?
Councilmember Burke, good evening again. I'm not prepared to answer that right now. We'll have to get with the petitioner regarding foot traffic and what their plans are for pedestrians who may be entering the complex. So we'll have to get that information and get it to you following the meeting.
Thank you so much, Mr. Duquesne.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, anything further on this item? If not, if I could get a motion for approval, I'd appreciate it.
I move for approval.
We already have that, as our city clerk just reminded me, so if we could take the roll.
We didn't get a second.
Oh, we need a second, sorry.
Second, Burke.
Awesome. All right. Now the roll call, please.
Councilmember Scipio.
Yes.
Councilmember Larson.
Yes.
Councilmember Burke.
Yes.
Councilmember McIntosh.
Aye. All right, that dispenses with our consent items. Let's go to our general agenda. And if the city clerk would read item G1.
Item G1, resolution approving additional items related to the Strawway Rehabilitation Project to spend the remaining project funds.
And again, on my cheat sheet for that one, I've got Damon DeCane, Assistant City Manager.
Yes.
Give us a rundown on this. This is an item that I understand we have extra money to spend. That's a good thing.
It's a good thing.
Yes, sir. It's staff agrees with the chair and the committee members. I'll take this opportunity to introduce our Deputy DOT Director, Mr. Jeffrey Fansler. He'll brief you on the item and be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. DeCane, and good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee and council. Thank you for this opportunity to give you a summary of the project and how we plan to spend down the balance, as you heard, of the remaining project funds. So real briefly, I will give you an overview of the project, and then we will talk about the additional that staff is bringing for you today to consider to help spend the balance of the funds. So as you all are likely aware, the 2018 bond referendum awarded $1 million for Strawway rehabilitation efforts. The base scope of the project really consisted of resurfacing of the pavement surface there from essentially Salem Avenue all the way just about 500 or 600 feet north of Brookstown Avenue. It included some bridge repair, pretty extensive bridge repair. Other items that were included with the base scope of the project included some streetlight maintenance, some tree pruning, and some significant storm drain repair that had to take place in certain areas along the Strawway. And that was the base scope of the project. I'm happy to report that the project went well, and we have satisfied all those obligations as part of the base scope. And we come in under budget and right at about a little bit less than $600,000. So before you tonight, we'd like to discuss additional elements of what staff is recommending to spend down the balance of approximately $400,000 to reach that $1 million allocation that the 2018 bonds did have for the Strawway improvements. And so thank you, Meredith, for bringing up this map here. I'll go over that because it includes 6 items that I want to discuss real briefly that staff is recommending that we add to this project to, again, spend the full amount that was allocated. So I did mention 6 projects. Those are highlighted here on the map before you. I'll highlight the icons that are shown by the pedestrian walkman here. Essentially, what staff is recommending is pedestrian accommodations in the form of pedestrian signals at 2 existing traffic signals. One is at Marshall and Salem Avenue. There is, let me back up and say the formal Strawway path, if you can follow follow the screen here, as you indicate, it actually travels along Salem Avenue and then through the Gateway community. That is the formal Strawway path, and it crosses Salem Avenue there where that icon is indicated there. It's highlighted before you. And so we're recommending pedestrian signals there to help facilitate that pedestrian crossing. Today, there are none to accommodate the north-south pedestrian movement. Furthermore, we're also recommending pedestrian accommodations in the form of pedestrian signals at the intersection of Main and Walltown. Again, to facilitate pedestrian movements in the area, we have, of course, the Happy Hill Park just adjacent to there and a lot of sidewalk infrastructure that would really be beneficial if we had pedestrian signals accommodating foot traffic across Main Street there. In addition to that, you'll notice what's shown there by the park benches icons on the north side of Salem Avenue, just to the west of the roundabout. You'll notice what we're recommending is additional amenities. If you spend any time on the Strawway, you probably noticed that we have just replaced the benches, the trash receptacles, and those type elements. And that, again, since that is actually the formal Strawway path, that sidewalk along that portion of Salem Avenue is 10 feet wide today. It is recognized as the formal Strawway path. Staff is recommending that we include those accommodations along that segment as well. And so briefly moving on, a couple other items we'd like to call your attention to is what's shown by the red line here. So through investigation, talking with Matthew Burchek in our office and really understanding how the pedestrians and cyclists are using this area, we identified that folks that use the Strawway do like to come down this section of sidewalk shown in red to get to the Greenway, which crosses under Main Street there just south of the roundabout. And they don't prefer the Strawway path through the Gateway community. They prefer this sidewalk path to the Gateway, to the Greenway there just south of the roundabout. So what staff is recommending there is that we would take some of these balance of funds and improve that section of sidewalk to 10 feet wide. to better facilitate the foot traffic, the recreational cyclists, and use that facility to continue folks toward the greenway. And again, that's shown in red. So two other elements I want to discuss real briefly, again, is what's shown in green, and that is additional sidewalk, widen and install 10-foot sidewalk from basically Walltown Street all the way to Happy Hill Park, and that's along Alder Street. So staff discussed this area in detail about, what would be most beneficial for the area. And the connection that we're trying to, in this area, the sidewalk infrastructure is really good, but there seems to be a missing link connecting folks to the park. And what staff is recommending is that we fix that problem and we install a 10-foot sidewalk, basically from Walltown Street, that you can see real faintly a connection trailhead to the greenway on this side as well. So essentially from that area to the Happy Hill Park. And then the last thing I'll call your attention to, shown by the light bulb here, is essentially additional lighting improvements on the Molle Light Bridge. You may notice there is an element of architectural lighting on the bridge, but what is lacking is the pedestrian level lighting. And that is one of the recommendations we're moving forward with, is in just improving the lighting overall in this area to accommodate the trail users. So again, these 6 items are what staff has recommended. What we have recommended these for 2 reasons. 1, we feel these are most beneficial to the pedestrian users in the area. And 2, we feel these are constructible with the remaining $400,000 in our budget. So with those 2 items up for discussion and what staff feels comfortable for, this is where we landed on presenting this to you tonight. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
All right. Questions from committee members, Councilmember Scipio.
Not a question, but a comment. I do want to congratulate the staff for thinking about Happy Hill Park and the sidewalk, connecting it down to Main Street. Many of the residents in Happy Hill, in that area, are walkers. And it is really good that you thought enough to try to connect them on the paths that they walk, and in a lovely way. So I do congratulate you for that. I'm very pleased with that addition. And the park is just such a beautiful park that I think that walkway will connect other people to Happy Hill. It's a two-way walk. People who live up in Washington Park will probably feel more comfortable coming to our beautiful park because the sidewalk is so inviting. I would just like to recommend that after you do that, if you have some funds left, if you could consider putting a bench or 2 along that stretch from Alder Street down to Walltown. So many people do walk there, and I think a little comfortable bench would actually help their journey. So thank you again for putting Happy Hill in that plan.
Councilmember Larson.
These are great amenities and add-ons to a project that's already making a huge impact, connecting the South Ward to the east and southwest, southeast wards. 2 parks, particularly Washington Park and then of course Happy Hill Park, are benefiting from it. I do have one question, though, sort of a technical one that's been asked of me, and it deals with street lighting and replacement of some street lights that are going on apparently in the city. I don't know whether this is part of that project or not, but the word that I'm getting is some of the light color seems to be at variance with popular opinion as to what light color should look like. Rather ghastly in color, lacks the warmth, and it's unattractive. And I don't know whether this is something we're adding to the system as we add additional street lights. This is a conversation separately with Duke Power, how this is going to be conducted, what the forecast for city street lighting will be because of some concern about the coloration of the lights that are going in.
Mr. Duquesne, would you like to field that one?
Yes, sir. So Councilmember Larson, actually, you and I have I believe we discussed this previously. What you're seeing is the new high efficiency LED fixtures that are being installed by Duke Energy. They do lack that sort of warm glow that we're used to seeing, that sort of orangish yellowish color, and it's more of a stark white or blue. So that's something that we'll have to address with Duke Energy, and we'll be happy to bring back an update after we've done so.
Yeah, that sort of caught a lot of people by surprise, I think. And my perception is there's a one-on-one replacement as the lights go out. They're getting swapped out with this new light fixture. And maybe it's time to be careful about how far down this road we go with this particular variance. I don't think too many people knew that it was even coming. And the people that have observed it have commented to me not in favorable terms.
Yes, sir.
Okay, other questions or comments? I do just want to take the privilege here and just voice a couple of comments. It is, I know it's something that we strive for, and I think this addition to this project really does create an awful lot of connection between different points, and with a little bit of concrete, some sidewalk, a few lines of paint, a little better lighting, it ties in really 3 or 4 different neighborhoods and communities. As Councilmember Larson said, 2 parks are involved in this. So I think this is money very, very well spent. I do have a question for Mr. Fansler. What I hear you say about the strollway is that we have a formal strollway that goes through Gateway Commons, but informally people prefer to use the sidewalk coming down on Main Street. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. The strollway proper does actually reside through the community, but users tend to choose using the roundabout to Main Street.
So let me ask you this. Would it make more sense, or do we need to look at an enhanced pedestrian crossing across West Salem closer to that circle? Do we actually have more traffic, more pedestrian traffic there? And it may already be handled by the, it looks like we've got a pedestrian refuge there. As long as staff is comfortable that that can carry the realistic traffic we're going to see, then that's great.
Mr. Chairman, we'll take a look at that. There is high visibility crosswalks and a refuge island for the roundabout approach. And we'll make sure that improvements include a safe crossing at that location as well.
Great, as long as you guys and Mr. Burchick have looked at that and feel comfortable, and that's great. So, okay, wonderful. Is this an action item? Info item? Okay, great. All right. Okay, so it is a resolution. If I could get a motion from committee member?
I move we approve this item.
Second, Burke.
We have a motion and a second. If City Clerk would call the roll.
Councilmember Scipio.
Yes.
Councilmember Larson.
Yes.
Councilmember Burke.
Yes.
Councilmember McIntosh.
Aye. Well, that was good. All right, we can get City Clerk to read off the next item, G2.
Item G2, resolution adopting the City of Winston-Salem Pedestrian Master Plan.
Once again, I'm going to turn to Damon Duquesne on this.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The last item was a great segue to this one. So what will soon be presented, and I'll take the liberty of introducing Matthew Burchick of our DOT staff. He's been working on this with our consultant since early 2020. And one item that I'm proud of, I know the staff is proud of, and you all should be too, is the amount of community outreach that was done on this master plan, the effort that was put into that to ensure that we heard from as many people as we possibly could. And in my opinion, of all the master plans that we've done in my tenure here, this has the most robust community input on it. So I just wanted to draw that to the chair and committee's attention. With that, I'll turn it over to Matthew to do the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Duquesne. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and committee members and council members. My name is Matthew Burchick, and I'm the Bicycle and Pedestrian Coordinator for the City DOT. And in a few minutes, I'm going to turn it over to Jason Reyes, who's a senior planner with Alta Planning and Design. Alta helped us with this plan and helped develop the plan. Before I do that, though, I wanted to mention a couple of things. Mr. Duquesne mentioned the public outreach, and I certainly want to address that. But first of all, this is, I think, just an important time for this plan in general. Over the last few years, unfortunately, we've seen an increase in pedestrian-related crashes. So that was definitely an emphasis with this plan, is to address those safety concerns and try to make improvements there. On the positive side, the city currently has, I did a quick calculation on some of the projects that we're managing, over $30 million in pedestrian and bicycle projects underway right now in some form of design or construction. So there's certainly been a commitment to improve and make the community more bikeable and walkable. This plan will take the next step and ensure that we continue to invest our resources where they're most needed. And that was definitely an emphasis with this plan, is to identify the areas of greatest need and make those recommendations. Mr. DeCane mentioned the public involvement aspect of the project, and I as well, I'm very proud of that and appreciate Alta Planning and Design's effort on that. It's obviously difficult during a pandemic to get that public input. But we had a great steering committee. There were over 20 organizations throughout the community that were involved with that steering committee that helped us develop the goals and objectives for this plan. So that laid a good groundwork for us. That was an important initial step for us to develop that steering committee. So thank you to all those groups that participated in that. And then we received over 600 public comments through our website, through our public input meetings. And one of the aspects that I think worked really well was we paused several times in that process of collecting input and assessed where we were falling short and where we were succeeding. And we took specific steps to address those areas where we were falling short by doing direct interviews with residents and community leaders, by doing direct mailings to neighborhoods that had been underrepresented. So that was a major focus of this. And the last thing I'll say is this whole process was very much data driven. So I think, we developed goals and objectives with our steering committee, and then we identified data that would help us assess where there was the greatest need and where we were having issues. And the results of the plan, the recommendations, are a direct result of that data driven process. So I know Jason is going to get into more detail on that. And I think with that, I'll turn it over to him. Jason, go ahead.
Thank you, Matthew, and thank you everyone for the time. I believe we have some slides that either I could share my screen or we might have another person that's ready to share. It looks like Meredith might be having it up here in a second. So I think what we'd like to do is start off by recapping, a little bit of the project recap and schedule. So I think if you could go forward a couple slides there, you can see the timeline. And we started pre-pandemic. We had our first kickoff meeting in person where we were all together in the same room, no masks, no idea what was coming. It was just I believe in January of 2020, and it feels like about 5 years ago at this point. But that's when we started this process and quickly started to adapt, as you'll see in some of the next slides, about what our approach was in terms of adapting to that. But the next thing we got into is the existing conditions analysis, and that took us through the second committee meeting and some early public webinars, and then the draft plan development, leading into prioritization, taking us into 2021. And then we were finalizing the plan based on some of the last bits of input we were receiving from the public and from the committee and from others as we presented the plan to city staff and to other groups. And we were just, trying to align ourselves with the next available slot on the agendas of the various boards. And so here we are in August presenting for plan adoption and are nearly there. So we'll go through some of the big picture steps. So the next thing you'll see is the vision and goals slide, which talks about some of the main components, enhancing health, increasing safety, promoting equity. The economic impact of these types of facilities is huge. Just being able to improve quality of life for people, I think, is a big deal. And then also there's environmental benefits to it as well as connectivity and mobility. But all these things, can really be sort of narrowed down to creating a connected and accessible and safe network of sidewalks and trails in the community. And so that was our goal, and that was the sort of vision for this process. And one thing we wanted to do once we had established that's the vision we wanted to head towards is really, check with the public and see, okay, if that's where we're going, how do we get there? And where's the public feel some of these improvements are most needed? And so that's what we started going through with the engagement process. So if the next couple slides there, you'll see our overall public outreach sort of roster of activities there. We started off with, making sure a lot of information is available online, as you do with most of these plans, but also having an online interactive map to be more engaged with people as far as where they can drop points on the map and tell us where they'd like to see improvements and what types of improvements. And then also, getting out on the city social media, using the committee for word of mouth and doing some interviews. Different sets of webinars and actual mailers were used as well as a public survey. And so all those things together sort of covered our bases in terms of wanting to engage with people both online and also hearing from people as we were able to talk to them through the committee and through other groups. So one thing we'd like to share with you is our very early version of the outreach. You'll see on the next slide. This was back in June of 2020. We had about 300 comments, people participating in this effort. And you can see there's a bit of a divide there, and we weren't really happy with that. And so what we did was we started to adapt by starting to talk to people in different neighborhoods. And you can see on the next slide, by the time we got to October, we were up above 650 comments with a greater distribution across the city after some of those interviews and after getting the word out through the committee more. But even at that point in October, we were feeling like there was still sort of a gap in the southeastern part of the city. And what we wanted to do was do some targeted outreach there. And so we put together a mailer, and we had these postcards go out all over this section of the city in English and in Spanish. And we had a Spanish section on the website and a Spanish comment form as well. And we were able to receive some input that way. But this at least got the word out about the project overall, and so that we were sure that we were at least getting the word out. That altogether started to result in some good input back from the community. And so you can see that on the next slide. Some of the ways we did that was with the webinar, and you can see from the July and November sessions, we started to get some input from people there, and you can see that the connections and the connectivity to destinations as far as getting to schools, libraries, transit stops, grocery stores, to other trails and greenways and parks and rec centers. So all those things are important, but also just really wanting to see more infrastructure on the ground for pedestrians in terms of sidewalks and improving safety at intersections. The next slide, you can see a couple more of those pieces of feedback. We wanted to know how to get more outreach to people, and so that was where we got the idea for the interviews with committee members, and then with the mailed info cards and surveys and social media. And again, biggest safety concerns, it's sort of an inverse of the last question, lack of sidewalks and lack of crossing streets that are safe and the high speed areas. And so those are all things that helped inform some of our discussion going into the actual draft plan development.
Jason, may I ask you a question, please?
Absolutely.
Can you tell me the difference between the orange people and the green people on the preceding maps?
Yeah, so we had a couple different questions that we were asking on the interactive map, and one was where people would like to see an improvement for walking, and so those are all the red dots. And then the green ones are where people like to go currently, where they like to walk currently. And so there was a lot of the green ones were associated with destinations like parks, centers, and schools and things like that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Yeah, and at any point, please feel free to reach out for some questions, and we'll try to leave some time at the end too. But yeah, so when we got into the draft plan stage, we went back to our vision question, which you can see on the next couple slides there. And we wanted to ask ourselves, well, if our vision is, this connected, accessible, and safe network, how do we get there? And so what we did is start to pull on that information we started studying early on in the process. And so that was looking at existing conditions. And that was looking at things like demand, like where the destinations are within the city, but also things like safety. And so you can see here on the left-hand side of this slide, you can see pedestrian collision clusters. Those are areas where we've seen a lot of past crashes in the data. So the larger red circles are where you see more of those, and smaller red circles are other areas where we've had crashes as well. And we wanted to overlay that and look at, well, is there a tie to towards equity for some of this too? And so we wanted to look at things We want to look at demographic data throughout the city for things like race and income and English proficiency and lack of access to a vehicle, all things that are available through the census data. And so that's what you see in the darker blue areas there. And you can see how that sort of overlays with a lot of the collision areas as well. And so we know that that's something that needs to be addressed, and that's something we built into our recommendations as well. So that's an example of how we dig into the existing conditions data to start informing the recommendations. And so we looked at the overall street network for the city of Winston-Salem, and we were able to identify where some of these corridors are and identify them by different categories, whether they're in the a major urban walkway or more of a suburban walkway or a neighborhood connection and those types of things. And so you can see that overall here with the overall network. And then what we did was subtracted out where we already had sidewalks, for example, on some of those corridors. And so what we were left with was a network of opportunities where you can have improvements. And so on the next slide, you'll see where some of those are throughout the system there. And so what we wanted to do was then take that remaining network and prioritize it. So these are where our gaps are. And then how do we go about then prioritizing what's left? Because we can't go out and build sidewalks all over each one of these tomorrow. So we have to, want to have a data-driven approach that gets us to an answer for that. And so that's what you'll see on the next few slides here. So what you see in different shades of purple, it's hard to see on this slide, but there's a gradation of the purple lines, and the darker purple ones being higher priority and the lighter purple ones scoring a little bit lower on that process. There's also a lot of dots there as well. So that's the same analysis put forth for some intersection improvements and crossings for pedestrians as well. And so let's talk a little bit about how we did that, how we went about prioritizing some of those. So the next slide, I think, gets to some of that. We wanted to start with going back to our vision and goal. And so the different plan goals you can see there listed, promoting equity, enhancing connectivity, increasing safety, livability, economic impact, health, and environment. And we put some objectives to those was the next step, and sort of outlined, well, if that's the goal, then what's the next step in terms of the plan objective? And so you can see that on the next slide too. And I'm not going to read each one of these, but they basically just build on that goal and gets a little bit more specific in terms of, okay, well, what can we measure in terms of that? And the next slide you see there, we added some scores to those objectives. So we wanted to make something that's measurable. So for example, if the goal is to enhance connectivity, then, if you have two projects and one of them is connecting to a library and a school and a park, then that should get a certain amount of points versus one that's not connecting to those things. And then the same thing for equity and for connecting to areas where you have those crashes and so forth. And so that's what you see on the next slide, is where we actually applied some numbers to each one of those things. And then we were able to use GIS and our data that we've collected for the plan and actually apply those points to the different segments. I hope that makes sense, because that's kind of the crux of the whole thing for this plan, is to be able to have a data-driven process that allows you to then see what you can bring forth as a top project, and have it be somewhat defensible too, to say, here are the reasons why this project scored high. And one of the things I really like about this plan in general is that it's not just a plan that we're delivering here for this project. It's really a process more than anything. And so we just had a meeting with Matthew Burchak and some others from his staff to talk about the process that was used and the tools that were used. And we shared all of that in great detail in terms of how this process can be rerun, so that as you build more projects or as you want to adjust your criteria, you can do that. And one reason you might want to adjust criteria, for example, is if you have a funding source that's, say, it's focused on safety, then you can look at just the projects that score highest for safety, for example, or equity or health or whatever it may be, so that you can use this as a tool more than just a static plan, was the idea behind that. So that kind of sums up that part of the process, taking that information from the existing conditions, from the public and the committee, and sort of rolling it into a process of prioritization. So the next few slides, I'll just take a couple more minutes here just to give you some examples of how that kind of turns out. And so if you take the city and divide it up into areas, and if you looked at the sort of the northeast area there, you can see Motor Road there, for example, as one of the examples of a higher scoring project in that area. We know we've got the school there, we've got bus stops on that road, we've got no sidewalks on it. And this is an example where, if you do go in and put in pedestrian infrastructure, it is going to be, it may be more expensive, but it's a higher priority project, and more expensive in this case because, you've got the drainage swale there and you probably have to put in curb and gutter. So that's just one example of a high scoring project in that area. If you go to the next one for the southeast, you can see some of those corridors there as well in the dark purple. And so forth on the next one for the southwest area, you can see Peters Creek Parkway scoring very highly there, heading north-south out of downtown. And then you can see in the northwest there, University Parkway as a great example there, West 28th Street connection. And we also went ahead and zoomed in on the Central Business District. Not as many linear projects there because there's a lot of sidewalk already built there, but still some intersection projects and some spots on Broad Street and Chestnut, for example. And then also, this is an example of one other way you can run the prioritization. If you were really just focused on equity, for example, you can see some of the results there in terms of University Parkway, Motor Road, again, like we mentioned earlier, Peters Creek, and so forth down the line. And so this is a great tool in that respect, in that you can adjust it to how you need to use it. But then also you have some top projects as a takeaway here that you could use for applying for funding through the MPO and through other state funding for improvements. So the other things that are involved in the plan, one of the big aspects of the plan, if you have looked at this document, you'll notice that a good chunk of it, there is a large section of design guidance for how to do these types of projects. And so that's a great takeaway for Public Works and for others, just to use as a guiding tool, things to think about and consider as you are planning some of these facilities and designing them. What are the best practices? What are the design guidelines that are out there today that you can fall back on if you need to? So all that's in that chapter on design guidance. Lastly, with the implementation chapter, there's a lot of words on these slides, so I'm not going to read each one, but the basic gist of this is that, we want to adopt the plan. We want to start into a long-range planning phase where we are able to find funding sources for these high-scoring projects, and then go into the next phase of an annual planning phase where you start to get those cycled through as you're building them out into the future, and then also going into design and construction and evaluation, and letting that sort of loop back to that priority list and assessment as you refine that list and as you build more projects. So lastly, the appendix in the plan includes a lot of information about different funding strategies, about performance measures, maintenance recommendations, and policy recommendations. And so all that's in the plan itself, and hopefully are great tools going forward for Matthew and for his team and for the city as a whole to go forward and get some of these projects built and on the ground. So that's all I had. I know I went over a little bit on time, so I want to stop there and just see if anybody has any questions.
Thank you, Jason. That was awesome. Have I got questions from committee or council? Councilmember Scipio.
I always have a question.
Yeah, ma'am.
Now, Jason and Matthew, in the presentation, there were no priority projects in the East Ward or in the East Side. And I'm not sure if there were projects in the actual report that didn't measure up to top priority for the East Side. But I do know that most of the East Ward, closer to downtown, are the older neighborhoods, and most of them have sidewalks, even some of our main corridors like MLK and New Walkertown Road. And is that why we didn't see any top priority projects in your presentation? that included streets in the East Ward. I just didn't see any streets in the East Ward having a priority, though a lot of people do a lot of walking in my ward.
That is a great question, and I'm glad you asked it because it shows that you've been paying attention and that you actually looked at the plan. So I'm really glad to hear that. So one thing you'll notice, if you look on page 42 of the plan when you get a chance to later on, there are a lot of intersection recommendations because as you said, there are a lot of sidewalks already built. And so really the stage that the east side is in right now is one in which improving those intersections would be the best path forward for improving safety. And so there are definitely a lot of intersections to look at in that area for improvement. I talked to Marva Reed during the planning process and talked to her for over an hour about some different intersections and thoughts on improvement. And those are in the plan too, as well. Those are outlined and listed, her feedback.
Councilmember Larson, did you have a question or comment? You're on mute.
Unmute.
Well, I'm on mute, when I? No, I would only comment the congratulations to the staff, Matthew, for a most comprehensive study. I think we've gone a long ways in bringing this topic into the forefront of Winston-Salem. And this gives a lot of legs, I think, in the years ahead as we look at bond projects and improvements. And I appreciate the work that's recognizing sidewalks as well as bicycle pathways and other methods of walking and biking and running and greenways and what have you. I think it's all part of the matrix that gives us communication alternatives. And the bridges are all part of this. And we talk a lot today about different things that connect this city together. And what you're talking about today is exactly that. Another example of the way that we can communicate among each other in different ways and in accessible ways. So thank you for that.
Councilmember Burke.
Yes, I think that the concept is really great and the benefits are outstanding and they will be for our citizens. But I basically have the same question that Councilmember Scipio had regarding the Northeast Ward. I really didn't see where we fit in. And I know that we have a great need if that's what we're looking for, the areas with the greatest needs. I believe that's what you said. We have more people in the Northeast Ward and who are walkers and not drivers. They don't possess vehicles, so they would need the sidewalks. They would need these conveniences, these amenities. So I just don't see where we were included in the way that you have described as far as equity.
All right, so there's a couple of different areas for that. And I think it may come back a little bit to whether or not they're corridor projects that would be recommending or intersection projects. And so one way that could be addressed in implementation is by when you are going through the process of identifying projects for the next year or for the next couple years with Matthew and others on his team, that may be one element of prioritization, is being sure that you have a geographic representation and split across the city when you're going after those new projects. And so the examples that we showed that were in the plan were based on the data and the prioritization that was set up. And so if we want to address that geographic piece of it, that's very easy to do in terms of just sorting the projects by geography to be sure you have representation across the board when you actually go to get these things funded.
I think that would be great. I can support that.
Other questions?
Councilmember, I would just add that, in addition to what you see here, every street within the city was evaluated based on this data. So at any point, we can pull up an evaluation of any street and show how it compares to the need on other streets. So as Jason mentioned before, we can fine tune this to whatever need we may have.
That would be great. Thank you.
Councilmember Scipio.
You know, I was sitting here and I was thinking about, we have these wonderful plans. We do a great job of putting together plans and guides together, but when it comes to implementing them, we get a little slow. And one thing about connectivity, particularly about pedestrian-friendly things, we have so many trails and paths and strollways, and yet we never excite the community about using them. Some people use them, but there's not a big citywide push to use these wonderful amenities we have. So as we go forward to bring more to the community, I hope we accompany that with the marketing to motivate people to come out, to include them in the process of creating these spaces so that they have ownership and they'll come right back out and use them. But we do have some wonderful things, and I thank you for the insight. I'm looking forward to the prioritization of looking within every ward to see where we need to build in these amenities so that when people come from one side of town to the other, they don't miss a beat.
Absolutely, yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up too. I think Matthew has been looking for ways to move forward with a sort of user map of the city for walking and biking and maybe a wayfinding plan. So I think that's something I heard Matthew talking about in the past, and it may be next on the plate. Who knows?
Yeah, I think follow up on what Jason said. Yeah, that those are tools that we can definitely use to encourage people to get out there and use the infrastructure. We also partner with outside agencies, Safe Kids Coalition and the National Cycling Center and other groups to assist them in encouraging people to use the trails. And I think the bike share system is a good example of that, creating the infrastructure that people need to encourage them to use the trails and paths that we do have.
So perhaps we can do a citywide scavenger hunt using just our sidewalks and trails and strollways, and people have to go and find things across the whole city on one pretty day. And along the way, have some little ice cream stations or some snow cones or something. You know, get Parks and Rec involved.
Councilmember Burke.
Yes, I have an additional question, Jason or Matthew. I'm looking at the presentation and I see the image. It looks like it's an image of the committee meeting, members meeting together. You said that committee consisted of 20 members. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, that was the steering committee, and we had at least 20 organizations represented, everything from the Chamber of Commerce to Age Friendly for Sight, the Housing Authority, the Transit Authority. There were quite a few different organizations that were a part of that steering committee.
Okay, so this is the committee that I'm looking at.
That's right. Yeah, that's a snapshot of some of those members. Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anything else? I'd like to make a couple comments if there's no others. Jason and Matthew, thank you. This is the culmination of a tremendous amount of work. And I really want to pat you guys on the back for the level of outreach and engagement from the community. I think it really goes above and beyond, and it speaks to how we need to think going forward about inclusiveness and equity. I want to just quickly look at the slide that shows the Northwest Ward, and it's just the easiest one for me to sort of pontificate on. But to me, I look at this, and my ward consists of a lot of development that was done in the 20s in the inner core, and then an awful lot of suburban development outwards in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And what I see is the majority of the projects towards the core or the older neighborhoods where sidewalks were required when those neighborhoods were built. When those developments were done, I don't know if they were required, but they were an amenity that the developers put in. So the need for new sidewalks in that area is not as great as it is in Foxhall and Town and Country and neighborhoods that were built in the 60s where it wasn't required to do so. And unfortunately, it's very expensive to go back and retrofit those. So a lot of this is driven by cost. But what is interesting is that there are intersection issues in those closer in neighborhoods. So the needs and the requirements differ based on sort of a point in time of when things were developed. So that just kind of jumped out to me on that. I feel very comfortable that this has been vetted by the community. I know there's been a lot of back and forth with cycling groups and with runners and neighborhood groups and churches. So again, the process I think has worked very, very well. I would look at this plan as a potential recruiting tool for Greater Winston-Salem, Inc. One of the things that people look for in a community to either move to themselves or move their businesses to is the ability to get out and recreate and to log miles on greenways and trails and paths. And I think when I came on council in 2013, we were lagging in that respect. We actually got ranked nationally and pretty low on a list of communities. Now we rank much higher, and I appreciate all the work that council and staff has done to raise our position in that. I hope also that this plan would give us some ability to potentially capture some funding from DC to say, look, we've already done the research. We know where we need projects. And the engineering, hopefully we can pull together pretty quickly, but at least to get closer to the front of that line when dollars are getting ready to be spent out of DC for projects that are shovel ready. So I think this happened at a good time, and I really do appreciate that. I've got one particular intersection that I want to ask about only because a constituent asked me. I don't see anything relating to 5 Points over where Ardmore meets West End meets Buena Vista, and I'm just curious if I can get an update on that after this meeting, just to see what the thought process was there and whether or not that needs to be included in the study process.
Certainly, yeah. Mr. Chairman, we'd be happy to look at that, and we'll get back with you on that question.
Great. I appreciate that. This is an action item. And so if we are so inclined, I'd appreciate a motion and a second. Councilmember Scipio.
I have a question before that, just a comment. Matthew, do we have any idea about the cost of any of these improvements? And if so, if we don't, I think if you took the top priorities and tried to put a dollar amount on it, at least we will know that we know where. We don't know how much it's going to cost. And therefore, it might be something we want to consider with our monies that we're getting from American Rescue Plan. But we need to have a dollar figure. So if you could do if you could give us something around that later on, that would be fine. I move that we approve the final report here.
Can I get a second? And then Mr. Larson will come to you for a question.
I'll do a second.
All right, Councilmember Larson.
The plan is only as good as often as it's looked at and implemented. And as comprehensive as this plan has been in its development, one could easily see how it would go into become a dormant document simply because of the massiveness of what's being asked to be accomplished and the extreme vision that it represents for this city. I am excited by it, but also somewhat terrified that it's going to become simply another aspirational document that sits on the Department of Transportation's shelves. I think we ought to, as a committee, as a council, regularly review the plan and see what steps are being taken, and perhaps then challenging the city manager and others along the line to see what sources of funding would be available to bite this thing off into smaller, chewable pieces. But if we don't do that, if we don't periodically come back and ask, what are we accomplishing? And my bet is we're not going to accomplish much of anything. So I would certainly move second and approval with a caveat that it be brought back annually to City Council's Public Works Committee as a review document as to where we are and what's been done since that document was approved.
I'd like to echo that sentiment. This is only going to be as good as the political will of council makes it. If we are going to build these things, we are going to have to step up and spend money, which means we are going to have to go, to Councilmember Scipio's point, we're going to have to educate the public as to the benefits of this, and then we're going to have to ask them to open their wallets and pay for it. But it does need to be a key work item, and I'm sure it will go in our key work item. And I think bringing it up on an annual basis is entirely appropriate.
Yeah, you wouldn't say me if I was your sister.
Can we get a roll call, please?
Councilmember Scipio,
Yes.
Councilmember Larson,
You're muted, John. We got time.
Am I unmuted now? Good to go?
Good.
Absolutely enthusiastic, yes.
Councilman Burke,
It took a while to get there, didn't it? Gee.
Yes.
Councilman McIntosh.
Aye. Okay, that passes. Thank you very much, everyone. Now, if we could get to our third and final item on the general agenda.
Item 3, follow-up information on the on-street parking program.
All right, can we get a presentation on this, Mr. Duquesne?
Yes, sir, Chairman. This is a follow-up to information that was presented in June. I am pleased to introduce Mr. Rod Ring from our Department of Transportation, who will he'll give you a brief summary of staff's recommendation.
Good evening, Chairman and council members. As you know, we brought a presentation to you guys back in June of this year. Just giving you a status of the on-street parking program. As a result of this meeting, we're bringing a few recommendations to you today. Just briefly, we would upgrade approximately 270 old mechanical meters to slightly newer mechanisms that will allow us to implement a rate increase, so we can reprogram existing electronic meters to do the same. We can much easier program the pay stations as well. And we would like to seek proposals from pay-by-phone providers to offer that to our public as an option when they pull up to a parking meter. As a previously approved rate increase of 25 cents, we can implement that rate increase with about $86,000 of previously budgeted funds, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Council members, let's hear it. Councilmember Larson.
I think we're finally beginning to take a bite of the beast that we've been talking about for years, and that is the whole parking issue and how affordable, if that's the word to use, how cheap it is in Winston-Salem. And if we can go ahead and make a small motion, I think this is a creative one. What it does is open up a lot of options for how people want to pay or how they can pay. It doesn't deprive anybody of the right to stick that quarter in the machine or use their credit card or use their phone even to make a deposit or a purchase of a parking space. So I think there's a lot of merit in this, whether technologically it's going to prove out to be popular enough or whether we're going to see eventually people just not wanting to do that. I mean, I think only time will tell, but you're talking to a guy who's still fighting the computer era. So if we can try to somehow or another enter into the next century with some technology that is appropriate and in fact engaging to the city, I think it can only be a welcome sign for how progressive Winston-Salem is.
Councilmember Scipio.
Yes, I like, if I'm understanding this, we're only increasing our parking to 50 cents an hour, which probably would not break the bank too much. However, people can use their phone to pay and all of that. That's a really positive thing. I assume that DOT has looked into how hackable the system is with telephone payment, but through the provider that you would be using. I guess that's one of the things I'm concerned about is I don't pay by phone for things, but my daughter, who's much younger than me, that's all they do. They never have cash or change. They just go to the meters and do whatever they do with their phone or the credit card. So I really think this is good. And if I'm understanding the proposal right, is that we've already budgeted this. It's already covered in the current budget. So we're not looking for a new appropriation of funds to do this. So we can move forward with that. We just needed to know how we were going to do it and what we were going to do it with. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Yes, I'm very much in favor. Let's go ahead and move. I think at one time, other cities you pay a lot more for parking on street in other cities. But I think 50 cents is not a big, wouldn't be a big deal for some folks. And I think it's acceptable if we could go ahead and make that happen too.
Okay, other questions, comments? So is it, what I'm hearing is seems to be the committee's preference to move this to full council for a vote next Monday night?
It would be for me.
All right,
Yes,
so, Mr. Duquesne, you've got your hand up there.
Yes, sir. I'm trying to beat the city attorney to the punch here. So I think I finally did it. This is an information item that we brought essentially for the consensus of the committee. If the committee's satisfied with staff moving forward, I don't believe there's any full council approval required. We can just go ahead and implement the plan.
Great, great. I'd like to point out a couple things that no one else has questions, but so this to me is a very budget-friendly approach to this. I know we could go out and spend a whole bunch of money and change everything over at once, but I think it's also a fairly consumer-friendly approach to it in that it's a gradual increase in prices. One thing that sort of comes into the picture here as of late are the off-street parking, private lot managers who are charging significantly more than we were charging on street and in our decks. And I'm hoping that some of that drives people to our parking decks. Our parking decks are still a bargain. And so I think if we can do some promotion around that to get higher occupancy in our decks, that's good. And then gradually over time, raise prices, and not that gradually. I mean, over a couple of years, I think we need to get to market. But I do think the committee is wise in recommending that we do that in a couple of step approach. So I am all for this. I know we'll get some negative feedback, but as Councilmember Scipio said, if you go to another city, and it doesn't matter what city you're talking about, we are way, way, way under market. And we need, and I've said this before, right now, Greater Winston-Salem, if you don't live in downtown, you are subsidizing parking in downtown. Yeah. And that's something I'm not in favor of. I think people who park downtown should pay their own freight. And I think this puts us well on the way towards doing that. So I'm hearing that council would like staff to go ahead and implement this. Do we have to vote on that? Mr. Attorney? No. Okay, great. Councilmember Mundy.
Muted. You're muted.
I went the wrong way. Thank you, Chair McIntosh. I just want to emphasize that we need a good communication plan for this. It's not a huge increase, but even if we're just going up by a nickel, people don't like change, and they don't like being taken by surprise. So we need to do whatever it takes through the downtown association, through Jason Thiel's group, to let merchants know about it, to let consumers and parkers know about it well in advance, so they don't just show up one day and they've got a new parking meter. That's my plea with all of our marketing committee, that they work closely with whatever staff needs to be involved in that process to get the right message out there and get it out there before it happens rather than after the fact.
Councilmember Burke and then City Attorney. You're muted, Councilmember.
Sorry, just one question. Do we have any idea what the cost will be for our customers as far as the processing fee for the credit cards?
We anticipate it to be around 73 cents, but the technology is changing so dramatically that could be higher. It could actually even be cheaper. One of the things that we will do is we'll go out and seek proposals from qualified national vendors who are proven history of being safe and secure as well, and then we'll be able to see what those fees may be.
Thank you, Mr. Ring. And I think also I'm in agreement with Councilmember Mundy. We need to market this. We need to get this information out to the public. And if they are expected to pay a cost for processing, a processing fee, we need to be able to tell them what to expect as well. Yes, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
City Attorney.
Yes, I think you should, as a committee, go ahead and vote to approve the plan, the program as presented in the CARF. And it does appear, I think in May of 2018, the rate increase was approved at that time, but in terms of the program, it would be good for the committee to go ahead and approve it. Take a vote on it.
Great. And I agree with the messaging that we need to do. I think people who are going to pay by credit card will look at it as a convenience. If they don't have 2 quarters in their pocket, to be able to pay with a credit card, I think will be good. So, and to be clear, we are not going to have credit card capable machines all over downtown. We're rolling into that if I'm correct. Is that Mr. Ring?
Yes, sir, it's correct.
Okay, great. Okay, so if I get a motion, that'd be wonderful.
So move for advancing this forward.
And second, Burke.
Great. We have a motion and a second. If I can get the city clerk to call the roll.
Councilmember Scipio,
Yes.
Councilmember Larson,
Yes.
Councilmember Burke,
Yes.
Councilmember McIntosh.
Aye. All right, anything else for the good of the order? If I can just take a moment of personal privilege here. This is going to be the last meeting, I believe, that we're going to have Mr. Duquesne to kick around.
Can we throw water on him?
Well, I think he's a little too far away. You know, there may be other opportunities between now and the time he actually leaves, but Mr. Duquesne, we're going to miss you. And good luck in your future career, and stay in touch.
Yes, sir, I will. Thank you. It's been an honor and a privilege.
Well, thank you. If there's nothing else, I'm going to call the meeting adjourned. Thanks, everyone.